A 14-year-old black student aces the hardest test in school, so his teacher accuses him of cheating. But what happens next leaves the entire school speechless and turns this quiet boy into a national hero. You won't believe the truth that gets uncovered. It happened in the middle of a quiet classroom during a big final exam. Suddenly, Mrs. Carter, a strict older teacher with a reputation for being tough, slammed her hand on 14-year-old Zach's desk and shouted, "There's no way you got these answers right. You cheated." The entire class froze. Heads turned. Mouths dropped. Zach, a quiet, smart black student who always sat in the front row, was stunned. He looked up, confused and scared. "I didn't cheat," he whispered. But Mrs. Carter wasn't having it. "You expect me to believe someone like, you scored 100% on the hardest math test of the year? Someone like you?" Those words echoed in Zach's head. Was she talking about his background, his skin color, his neighborhood? He had studied for weeks, solved hundreds of practice problems. This was supposed to be his big moment. But now, it felt like his worst nightmare. Zach felt the stares burning into his skin. Some classmates looked shocked, others confused. A few even looked relieved. Like maybe they had wanted someone else to take the fall for doing poorly on the test. But Zach hadn't done anything wrong. He had studied late into the night while his mom worked the night shift. He had practiced every problem in the textbook, watched free math videos online, and even made flashcards out of old cereal boxes. Zach earned that perfect score. But now, instead of being praised, he was being punished. Mrs. Carter snatched the test from his desk and stormed to the front. "You'll be hearing from the principal," she snapped. "Cheating is a serious offense." Zach sat frozen, his hands shaking. He had never been in trouble at school, never been sent to the office, and now he was being accused of something he didn't do, all because his teacher couldn't believe he was capable of being great. After class, Zach walked to the office with his head down. The whispers followed him down the hallway. When he got home, his mom was already waiting by the door. She had received a call from the school. "What happened?" she asked gently. Zach could barely get the words out. "She thinks I cheated. Mom, but I didn't. I swear." His mom didn't doubt him for a second. She hugged him tightly and said, "You don't have to convince me. I know who you are. But we're going to make them see it too." The next day, Zach returned to school, but he wasn't alone. His mother walked beside him, her head held high. In the principal's office, Mr. Lawrence listened carefully. "We take accusations of cheating very seriously," he said, "but we also take fairness seriously. Zach, is it true you want to prove yourself?" Zach nodded. "Give me another test. Harder, if you want. I'll take it right now." The principal raised an eyebrow. "You're sure?" "Yes," Zach replied. "Let me show you." An hour later, Zach sat alone in a room with a brand new exam, more advanced than the last one. No calculator, no help, just paper, pencil, and pure focus. 30 minutes later, he handed it in. Another perfect score. The math teacher who graded. It couldn't believe her eyes. "This kid's a genius," she said. "He didn't cheat. He just knows what he's doing." Word spread fast. Within a day, students started talking. Zach was right. Mrs. Carter was wrong. He actually did it twice. The principal called for a full school meeting. Zach stood tall in front of everyone, proud and calm. And when Mrs. Carter was asked to apologize, the room was silent. Zach didn't need revenge. He had already won with truth, talent, and unshakable confidence. What Mrs. Carter didn't know, or maybe didn't care to know, was that Zach was no ordinary student. He wasn't just pretty good at math. Zach was a genius. Ever since he was a little boy, numbers were his escape. While other kids played video games or watched cartoons, Zach was obsessed with solving puzzles, figuring out patterns, and reading any book that even mentioned math. He'd write out multiplication tables on the back of cereal boxes. He once memorized all the prime numbers up to 1,000, just for fun. His mom, a hard-working single parent, noticed his gift early on. Even though money was tight, she found ways to support his love for learning. She bought second-hand textbooks from thrift shops, printed free worksheets from the library, and even skipped meals just to afford internet so Zach could watch math tutorials online. Late at night, while she worked the overnight shift at a local hospital, Zach would sit by the window with a pencil and notebook, solving equations by lamplight. He didn't just want to be good, he wanted to be great. He dreamed of becoming an engineer, building things that could change the world. But at school, it was a different story. Since day one in Mrs. Carter's class, Zach felt like he was invisible. No, worse, like he was targeted. Every time he raised his hand, Mrs. Carter looked right past him. When he gave the right answer, she'd frown or mark it as incomplete. Other kids who gave the same answers later would get praise and smiles. When group projects were handed out, Zach was rarely chosen to lead, even though he always had the highest scores. His classmates noticed it too. "Mrs. Carter always gives Zach a hard time," one whispered. "She acts like he's cheating, just for being smart," another said. Even Zach's friends started to feel uncomfortable. They knew he was the top student in class, but it was like Mrs. Carter didn't want to believe it. To her, Zach was just a quiet black kid from the poorer part of town. And that, sadly, was all she needed to form her opinion. But no one expected. What she did next, accusing him of cheating, in front of the entire class, was a step too far. She didn't ask questions, didn't pull him aside, didn't even consider that maybe, just maybe, he was telling the truth. She looked at his perfect score and decided, this can't be real, not from a kid like him. It wasn't about the answers. It wasn't about the rules. It was about her bias, and it was loud and clear. Zach felt humiliated. For the first time in his life, he wished he hadn't tried so hard, wished he'd just been average. Because being brilliant, being different, had made him a target. But what Mrs. Carter didn't understand was that Zach's brilliance didn't come from privilege or luck. It came from late nights, sacrificed weekends, and a burning determination to be more than what the world expected of him. And now, with his name stained and his reputation questioned, Zach knew he had to do something. Not to prove Mrs. Carter wrong, but to prove to himself that the truth couldn't be silenced, because no matter how unfair the world might seem, Zach believed in one simple idea: genius can come from anywhere. And sometimes the brightest stars rise from the darkest places. What Mrs. Carter didn't know, or maybe just didn't care to know, was that Zach was a math genius. Ever since he was a little boy, Zach had loved numbers. While other kids were playing video games or riding bikes, Zach was solving math, problems. He treated equations like puzzles, and puzzles like fun. His idea of a perfect weekend was staying up late working through problems way above his grade level. His mom, a single parent working 2 jobs, saw something special in him early on. Even when money was tight, she made sure Zach had what he needed to learn. She bought secondhand math books from thrift stores, printed worksheets from the library, and signed him up for free online courses when she could. Some nights, she came home from work at 2 a.m. and found Zach asleep at the kitchen table, a pencil still in his hand, pages full of calculations. Zach wasn't just smart. He was dedicated. He pushed himself, stayed disciplined, and worked harder than most adults ever would. He wasn't trying to be the best in the class. He was trying to be the best version of himself. But none of that mattered to Mrs. Carter. From the very first day of school, she looked at Zach differently. When he raised his hand, she often ignored him. When he gave the right answer, she marked it wrong. When he explained a method that even some teachers didn't know, she brushed it off as too advanced or showing off. And Zach noticed. So did his classmates. "Mrs. Carter always picks on Zach," one student whispered. "Even when he's right, she makes it seem like he's wrong," said another. It wasn't just about grades, it was the way she looked at him, like he didn't belong. Zach tried to ignore it. He kept his head down and kept working. He thought maybe if he just stayed focused, things would change. But then came the final exam, the biggest test of the year. Zach had spent weeks preparing. He studied every night, practiced hundreds of problems, and even created mock exams for himself. When test day came, he walked into class nervous but ready. And he crushed it. A perfect score. But instead of being proud, Mrs. Carter was furious. She slammed her hand on his desk and accused him, in front of everyone, of cheating. "There's no way you got these answers right," she snapped. "You cheated," Zach froze. His heart pounded in his chest. "I didn't cheat," he said softly. But Mrs. Carter wasn't listening. Someone like you doesn't score 100% on my test. Zach's world seemed to stop. His hard work, his dreams, everything he'd built, shattered in a second. Not because he did anything wrong, but because his success didn't fit his teacher's expectations. She saw his skin color, where he came from, and made up her mind. He couldn't possibly be that smart. But what she didn't understand was that Zach's intelligence wasn't an accident. It was the result of years of struggle, discipline, and self-belief. It came from a mother who believed in him when no one else did, and a boy who refused to give up. Zach didn't need to cheat. He had already done the impossible. He had beaten the odds. And now, facing public humiliation and unfair accusations, he knew he had a choice: stay silent and accept the lie, or stand up and let the truth shine. The news spread fast. By the next morning, whispers filled the hallways. Students were talking in hushed voices by their lockers, teachers exchanged glances in the lounge, and parents started making phone calls. Did you hear what happened to Zach? They said he cheated just because he got a perfect score? Isn't that the kid who always stays after class to study? The story hit a nerve. It wasn't just about a test anymore. It was about justice, about prejudice, and about how a quiet, brilliant kid had been treated like a criminal for simply being excellent. Parents began flooding the school office with questions. They demanded answers. Why was Zach publicly humiliated? Why wasn't he given the benefit of the doubt? Why did it take a second test to prove what he had already shown? Under growing pressure, Principal Lawrence decided to act. He called a school-wide assembly. Every student, every teacher, and every parent who could make it filled the auditorium. The energy in the room was electric, a mix of tension, curiosity, and quiet outrage. Mr. Lawrence walked onto the stage, holding a folder with Zach's original test, his second test, and a statement in hand. He cleared his throat and spoke to the crowd. "I want to talk to you all about what happened this week. Something that should never have happened," he said. Zach was accused of cheating on his final exam. An accusation made without evidence, without fairness, without respect. He paused, then held up both tests. Zach was given another test, one even harder. He aced it. Again. A quiet wave moved through the crowd. Mr. Lawrence looked out over the room. Not only did Zach not cheat, but he is also one of the most gifted math students in our entire district, and we failed him, as a school, as adults, as educators. You could feel the silence, heavy and ashamed. "It's time we make it." "Right," Mr. Lawrence added. "Zach deserves an apology. From all of us." Then Mrs. Carter was asked to come forward. She walked slowly to the stage, her face pale and her lips pressed tight. She looked out at the sea of eyes staring back at her. When she finally spoke, her voice was flat. "Zach, I'm sorry, I made a mistake." But it didn't feel heartfelt. It felt forced, embarrassed, not remorseful. Still, Zach stood tall. He didn't flinch. He didn't glare. He just nodded slightly, calm and composed. When the room erupted in applause, students cheering, teachers standing, Zach simply smiled. His classmates clapped, a few even cried, and Zach's mom, sitting in the front row, rushed up to hug him. "You showed them who you are," she whispered. "Not with anger, not with yelling, but with your brilliance." In that moment, Zach wasn't just a student. He was a symbol of what happens when truth stands firm against unfair judgment. He didn't just pass a test. He passed the ultimate test of character, and the whole school saw it. The news spread fast. By the next morning, Zach's story had become the talk of the entire school. Students whispered in the hallways, teachers looked uneasy, and parents began calling the front office. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. Why was Zach treated like a cheater? Just for being smart? Many parents were furious. Zach wasn't. Just a good student. He was known for his quiet determination, his perfect homework, and his love for learning. The idea that a teacher accused him without proof felt deeply wrong. That pressure reached Principal Lawrence, and he knew the school had to respond. He called a school-wide assembly. The auditorium was packed. Students, staff, and even some parents filled the seats. The room fell silent as Mr. Lawrence stepped onto the stage. "What happened to Zach should never have happened," he began. He was accused of cheating with no real evidence, but when given another, more difficult test, he scored perfectly again. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Zach didn't cheat, Mr. Lawrence said firmly. In fact, he's one of the most gifted math students in this entire district, and we failed him. That stops today. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. Mrs. Carter was called to the stage. She looked embarrassed as she spoke. "Zach, I apologize," she said, but her voice was low and stiff. She looked more ashamed of being caught than truly sorry. But Zach stood calm, strong. He didn't gloat or lash out. When the entire room clapped for him, students, teachers, even parents, he simply smiled. And when his mom hugged him afterward, she whispered, "You showed them the truth. With grace, with strength, and with brilliance." Zach had turned injustice into victory, with quiet power. If you were moved by Jamal's story, don't forget to like, comment, and share this video. Let us know. Have you ever been underestimated because of who you are? Tell your story below, because your voice matters too. Subscribe for more real stories that inspire, shock, and open minds.